Hi, everybody. I'm Julianna Forlano. You're watching Act Now, act.tv show where we talk about what is happening in progressive activism. Joining us on the program today, Shahid Buttar, Nancy Pelosi's rival out in California. Much to say there. Also joining us in the second half of the show, Christina Conklin, the author of The Atlas of Disappearing Places. Her book is about combining art and science. It is a beautiful book, and I'm looking forward to talking with her about this, especially given the fact that today's breaking news is that NASA has confirmed that the oceans are, that the streams in the oceans that keep our temperatures regulated are in fact breaking down. Something I remember Al Gore talking about 20 years ago. That was a major danger, and now here we are. But first, we're going to start with our action report, where we are covering what a group of activists did in San Francisco just this past week. Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. You're watching ACT TV. A group of activists in San Francisco took to the streets and marched directly to Nancy Pelosi's office to call on the speaker and on President Biden to cancel student debt and unshackle millions of Americans who cannot get ahead due to what I would call a form of debt slavery. ACT TV is bringing you coverage of this event via some of the ground reporting by Shahid Buttar. Buttar will be joining us on the show in a moment. You may remember that Buttar ran against Nancy Pelosi twice, and he didn't win, but he may be winning the argument. I'm looking forward to that. Instead of introducing him to you directly, I thought I would play you his kick-ass campaign video. Here it is.
That the underlying principles of our government will not be greed, will not be kleptocracy, will not be hatred or violence.
Watch out, Washington. We the people are coming to take back Congress. And we're bringing with us some big ideas like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal. We did it in New York. We did it in Minnesota. We're doing it on the national stage, and now we're bringing that voice back to San Francisco. My name's Shahid Buttar. I'm running for Congress. I'm an immigrant. I'm a Muslim. I grew up in rural Missouri. When I was 16 years old, my family lost our house as I graduated from high school. I got my undergrad degree while working full-time after 10 years of night school. Then I went to Stanford to study and teach law. I've fought for your rights for 20 years, from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. as a constitutional lawyer, policy advocate, writer, educator, and grassroots organizer. And now I'm running to serve the people of San Francisco by fighting corporate corruption in Congress. We don't have the corporate cash that's kept Nancy Pelosi in office for 30 years. In fact, we just don't take corporate money. That's why we're mobilizing the community, meeting in living rooms and neighborhood centers, why we're out in the streets fighting for change, demanding universal health care, fighting for your children and grandchildren's right to a future free from climate crisis and a government for, of, and by the people instead of the 1%. A voice for school teachers, working class families, and immigrants, the 99%. This movement is just getting started. After 30 years of the same representation, San Francisco deserves a champion willing to return our city to the front lines of the progressive movement. Our city stands for inclusion and pride, peace and justice, and environmental sustainability. We can't wait another 30 years for our leaders to evolve on climate change. Delay is no better than denial. The time for action was yesterday. America is the only advanced country in the world where getting sick can leave you homeless, and higher education buries people in debt for the rest of their lives. The only voices we need in Congress are ones who will take action to fix that. You have a choice. Either let profit-driven corporations destroy our future, or instead vote to reclaim this country for the people. Vote for Shahid Buttar in the March 2020 primary, and join our campaign in the meantime. We can protect the future, and we must. I'm Shahid Buttar. I approve this message, and I invite your support.
Shahid, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you, Juliana. Thank you so much for having me.
Quick question before we get to the action. Are you going to be running against Pelosi again?
Working on it. Yeah, hope to relaunch very soon. And I do see a need to hold the speaker accountable and
absolutely
policies to protect the future.
Absolutely. Well, can you talk a little bit about the rally that and the march and rally that was held in San Francisco that you were a part of? I have a video of you introducing it, but in your own words.
Yeah, it was a few days ago. San Francisco Rising, a grassroots group here, held a rally on the steps of City Hall, and then we marched to Nancy Pelosi's office at the Federal Building to exhort the speaker to show up for her constituents and multiple generations that remain effectively indentured by the yoke of $1.7 trillion with a T in aggregate student debt. And in the last week alone, she not only has falsely claimed that Biden lacks the authority to cancel student debt, based, mind you, on a Betsy DeVos analysis, which, and that aspect of this saga has gone widely unreported, but it's crucial that Nancy Pelosi is actually siding with Betsy DeVos to claim that Biden lacks the authority to cancel student debt. And then on top of that, she comes out with this, frankly, I don't mean this pejoratively, I mean it just simply descriptively, an ignorant analysis claiming that student debt relief would present a moral hazard to people who didn't go to school, as if education was not a social good, as if a educated workforce didn't benefit everyone, as if multiple generations aren't limited in their consumer spending power by student debt. So both the combination of embracing GOP analysis of executive power and having a conservative analysis of the value of student debt relief as a policy vision, on each of those issues, Nancy Pelosi is showing up supporting the GOP, not the Democratic Party that she leads in the House.
Is it valid that the president could not do something? Or is her statement about President Biden true?
So there are certainly,
because he's kicking it back to her, saying, "Oh, they have to act in Congress. I can't do it."
Right. This is the shell game, 3-card monte that happens in Washington, where everybody's pointing at each other and saying it's their fault. And just to be clear, there are certainly constitutional limits on executive power. The irony is that neither Nancy Pelosi nor Joe Biden respect those limits in any way when it comes to issues like unilaterally bombing other countries, right? And so the limits on, or torturing some folks, or ignoring international law to do whatever we want to around the world. And this phenomenon of ignoring constitutional limits when it's convenient to empire, but being suddenly very concerned about them when it comes to meeting the needs of a people in crisis, that distinction reveals a set of priorities. And it's a set of priorities that in no way are progressive. It's a set of priorities that come straight out of the Republican Party. And it is the very same priorities that unites the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party as well.
Don't you find it slightly more revolting that it's coming out of the Democrats who say that they are the party of the people, whereas the Republicans are like, we're not, and we don't care. They don't claim that mantle exactly.
Yes, except I would say more than slightly. And who you echo here, actually, none other than the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made exactly this point.
That's the best compliment I've ever had. Thank you.
Well, it's a really profound point that he makes in the letter from Birmingham jail. And it's basically, you paraphrased it. We should expect the intransigence of our enemies. That shouldn't surprise us. But when our so-called friends and allies, not only, he decried them not showing up. Here, Nancy Pelosi is showing up, just very much on the wrong team. And that, in fact, is even worse than the dynamic that he described.
Well, let's take a look at some of the video that you yourself brought to us. Thank you very much, and brought to the world from that action a couple days ago. Here is you introducing the march and rally.
So we're on our way to Nancy Pelosi's office from San Francisco City Hall with SF Rising and a coalition calling on Biden and Pelosi to cancel student debt. Folks might remember last week she came out saying that it was a bad idea to cancel student debt. She was claiming that people who didn't take on debt would be at a sort of moral hazard disadvantage. It's a classic right-wing talking point against debt cancellation. It is outrageous, frankly, that a Democratic leader was using them. But the part of her comments that frankly escaped most people's attention that was even worse, Pelosi claimed that Biden doesn't have the power to do it, and she cited a Trump administration analysis as support for her proposition. So why is the Democratic Speaker of the House citing a Trump administration decision for the idea that not only is student debt relief a bad idea, which it's not, it's a great idea for lots of reasons, and the beneficiaries extend well beyond those of us burdened by student debt. But why is she claiming, using a Trump administration analysis, that Biden doesn't even have the power to address our demands as a community? It's outrageous on so many levels. And so I'm excited to be with SF Rising, marching to Pelosi's office, calling on the speaker to support the need, not just of an entire generation, but multiple generations, and our entire economy, which is burdened by the yoke of over $1.7 trillion in student debt, burdening 43 million Americans. It's outrageous. And if you're struggling with the burden of student debt, you're not alone. And frankly, this is one of the issues, a defining issue of intergenerational justice, where we've seen the centrist establishment just continue the same pattern of giving a middle finger to those of us who aren't necessarily born into power.
We're speaking with Shahid Buttar. Shahid, thank you so much for joining us and showing us what you have been working on. Before, as we were producing this program, there were six of us on, on the call, in the back, in the green room, the virtual green room of this. Each one of us had a story, which we shared, about how we had been taken advantage of by student loan companies, taken advantage of by all of these rules, stuck, unable to, now we have our own children, foresee how we're going to pay off our own student loans and pay for the education of our children, which is not free. Can you talk, I know there were people who shared their stories, and we will share some of those at the event. Can you talk about the effect this is having on the human toll that this is having?
There are multiple generations that are constrained from pursuing their life choices because they are basically chained to lifetime indentures. I'll give you my own story. I came out of law school at Stanford 20 years ago, and I'm still in student debt. And just to be clear, I had student debt from undergrad before. And the first part of my story is even more revealing. I first went to college at the University of Chicago in 1991. My family had unfortunately just lost our home to foreclosure. I didn't realize that was happening when I was applying to school. So I get to college, I've got $600 in my pocket, max out all the federally available student loans, can't meet the expected family contribution. And within a year, I was on the street and I owed the University of Chicago $10,000. And I had all these student loan payments. I was 17 years old, uneducated, trying to survive on the South Side. And, I worked my way through that situation over the course of 10 years, graduated from Loyola University, summa cum laude, went to Stanford Law School to study and teach there. And, my story has a happy ending, as it were, in that respect. But too many people don't even get an opportunity to pursue all of the contributions that they could make to our society. Nancy Pelosi perceives this issue as if the people who have student loan debt, who would be benefited by a cancellation policy, as if they are the only beneficiaries of the policy. But that's not how it works, right? When people have an opportunity to pursue their dreams, the people that they then end up serving, all of the patients of the would-be doctors, right? All of the clients of the would-be social workers who can't pursue those opportunities because they have to pursue other ones to pay off their student loans. And 43 million Americans share this burden. And so it's all of the people who could be served by all of those people who are denied opportunities. The biggest, or maybe let's say the most concrete benefit of student debt cancellation is that it would unleash massive consumer purchasing power by multiple generations that at the moment have to dedicate many of their earnings and savings to debt service and interest payments instead of circulating it in the broader economy. We're literally talking here about job creation. But Nancy Pelosi is more interested in, again, repeating the GOP talking points suggested to her by The Intercept had an analysis, particularly of how the preceding events before her statement last week backing up the GOP, and it was effectively dictated to her by real estate mega donors here in San Francisco.
Next question: who is behind this with the money?
Well, and so the
real estate. That's interesting. I thought it would be, banking or education.
It's hard to extricate. When you talk about real estate and banking in San Francisco, those are two, and mining, I would say, is the third. Those are the old money industries here. Tech is obviously a new one, but any money here that's invested to the scale that the SWIGs are in real estate likely have holdings in banking too. And to step back from their particular holdings, I would invite your viewers to look at this through the lens of class interests by policymakers and their wealthy donors, and how federal legislation, not just on this issue, but from one issue to another is being contrived to serve the class interests of the millionaire policymakers who are using their roles in Congress to fill their own pockets. And it's not just the case that Pelosi's punching down at people facing student debt relief, right? She also prioritized tax breaks for millionaires in the coronavirus stimulus packages. She herself has personally benefited from payment protection program funds, which then ran out before they got fully distributed. All the insider trading scandals, and I could go on for a day about that. Like, the pattern of putting private profit before the public interest is very much the modus operandi of the corporate Democratic leadership. And Pelosi's willingness to repeat, again, a Betsy DeVos analysis at the exhortation of her wealthy real estate titan supporters, it is a reflection not just of conservatism, but it's a reflection of a hole in the bucket of our democracy. When we have the leader of the Democratic Party who won't even show up for Democratic Party values or interests or supporters, that's a problem. And it's a problem particularly for supporters of that party. And I do encourage Democrats to make better choices and to send to Washington Democrats who will actually show up for Democratic Party values, policies, interests, and supporters.
President Biden and Senator Elizabeth Warren were among the politicians who are pushing to changes to student debt. I understand they are still looking into whether they can legally forgive $50,000, I think is the number that was put out there by Biden first, and then he pulled that back to 10, and then Warren said 50, and now he's looking into 50. I don't know. That's the last I read, was that's where we were. But people are saying that it's practically legally impossible for him to do that. What are your thoughts?
It's absolutely legally possible. Just to be clear here, it was legally impossible to bomb Syria. Right? It's legally impossible to look the other way on torture and appoint the head of the agency someone who's complicit in it. It's legally impossible to prosecute a publisher for exposing US military secrets and war crimes, assassinating journalists. But we do all those things. What's interesting, and maybe there's a point here worth noting in terms of the gulf between the expert views and the reality on the ground. In law, we have a saying, it's somewhat apocryphal, but possession is 9/10 of the law. And all that means is the current stasis has a certain inertia. In other words, when a president chooses to do something, they get away with it until they can't anymore, right? When President Nixon was breaking into psychiatrist's office to discredit his critics, like, that also was illegal, but he did it anyway until it got caught. Executive power in the constitutional scheme is often governed by assertion and then challenges, either from Congress or the courts. So the only way to find out if Biden can do it is literally for Biden to do it. Right? It is that simple. And then there will be a response in the courts. Just to be clear, on the federal eviction moratorium, it's the exact same issue. There is a debate as to the limits of presidential authority. Biden conservatively deferred to that debate until Cori Bush, through an act of direct action and holding space in the Capitol and forcing public attention, literally held him accountable and forced him to say, well, there's a zone of ambiguity here. We're going to do it. Come hell or high water. And if there's a consequence, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We should do the same thing on student debt relief. There is literally no difference in the analysis of those issues. The only difference is that the Speaker of the House, the leader of House Democrats, in the context of student debt relief, again, is playing on the wrong team. And so Democrats have a president who campaigned on student debt relief, in Senator Warren, a leading light who shares that policy prescription. And they're debating over the scale of it, $10,000 versus $50,000. Meanwhile, their counterpart in the House, Nancy Pelosi, is cutting them off at the knees. And why Nancy Pelosi is cutting off Joe Biden and Liz Warren and 43 million Americans at the behest of her wealthy donors is a question I would put to San Franciscans, and the San Franciscans who continue to send her to Congress despite her policy record. And if San Franciscans had any idea how our city has been represented in Washington for the last generation, while the press has looked the other way, ignoring the conservative policy record of a policymaker who, again, has consistently chosen to fill her own pockets and those of her wealthy donors before meeting the needs of a people in crisis. These are issues that confront all of us, and we all share a stake in making different choices.
Well, as you say, people were specific, have very personal stories about how they are affected by this enormous debt burden. Going back to the rally, which it's wonderful that you even put this rally forward, because, as you said, Cori Bush on the steps of the Capitol drew attention to this issue, and then the Biden administration of eviction moratorium having expired, and then Biden stepped up, and even though it might be not legal for him to do it, he did something about it for the time being. So hopefully the kind of street activism that we cover here on actNOW and throughout our platforms on actTV is the kind of thing that can bring attention and put pressure on Nancy Pelosi and her ilk to do the right thing here too. We have a story, a protest story, from one of the protesters. Jacobs is coming up here. Let's take a listen to how student debt has affected his life.
So yeah, my name is Jacob, aka Axel Phoenix, and I'm 22 years old. And I would love to share a couple stories with you guys, if that's cool. Can I get a hell yeah?
Hell yeah!
So my dad, he got his doctorate recently, and he's over $300,000 in debt right now. He's struggled his entire college career, taking care of his boys. Me and my little brother, we just performed for y'all. And he was freshly divorced, and we were just like dirt poor, living in the house. He was trying to figure it out. He wasn't working. He was just trying to go to school, trying to get a job, you know what I'm saying, so that he could take care of us. But it was a struggle, you know what I'm saying. Now he's over $300,000 in debt, and I know that it stresses him out all the time, you know what I'm saying. He worked his way all the way to get to that place, you know what I mean. He's a doctor, but he still has to pay for that shit, you know what I mean. He's still, you know what I'm saying, like, struggling, even now that he's succeeding, you know, or whatever. And then I want to shout out my homie, Henry. I'm from the Central Valley, from a small town called Hanford. Not a lot of people make it out of Hanford just because there's not enough opportunities for our people. And I want to shout out my boy, Henry. He got into UC Irvine. He's one of the smartest dudes I know, but he couldn't afford to go to college because he comes from a very poor background, and he was in just rough conditions, and he was there, I think, for like a month, but then he had to come back just because couldn't afford to pay for it. And I just want to say, I want to be in a society where there's more opportunities for our people, and I want to feel more supported by our government, because this shit fucking sucks. Thank you.
Everyone watching this has a story, either a personal story or a story of someone they know who's been adversely affected by these enormous burdens of debt. Here is a compilation from the action of folks there talking about their personal experience.
So yeah, for those just joining us, we're here with a march to Pelosi's office to demand the cancellation of student debt by President Biden. And for folks who didn't track it, the powerful Democratic leader of the House opposes student debt relief and also claims that Biden lacks the power to do it based on a Trump administration rule. And if any piece of that didn't outrage you, the rest of it should.
This shit is fucking plaguing our society, man. Education is a God-given right. We should be able to go to that shit without having to worry about being thousands of dollars in debt. My dad, he's over $300,000 in debt right now, and he's had to struggle his whole way just to get his career.
Wow.
And I don't believe in that shit.
We have valued education from our entire lives. I'm going to college, as I said at first, but we can't afford it. I am in so much debt. Higher education is a right, should be a right, but it's treated like a business.
Pelosi sits comfortably in her mansion. She has taken a week off. And what are we doing? We're yelling because we know we deserve more, we deserve better, and we're here to tell her that.
Cancel the debt. Biden, cancel the debt. Cancel the Pelosi, cancel the debt. Cancel the debt. Cancel the debt. Cancel the debt. Come on.
So, I grew up in Arizona. My parents are Somali immigrants, and they have the exact same American dream of wanting to get all their kids into college. So I'm a first-gen college grad, and, you know, I thought I was going to live out that dream, but after I graduated, I saw the insurmountable amount of debt that I was in, and the amount of stress that it caused. I was working 2-3 jobs trying to pay off all of my classes while also being a full-time student. You know, college should be a time of social and educational growth, but here I am trying to pay the bills, deciding if I should go to school next year or I should be homeless. And that's not right. we have this, we were always told growing up that college would be this time for us to reach upward mobility and build generational wealth. But here I am, still paying off, extreme amounts of debt, not being able to build any wealth because I owe the government some imaginary money. So let's do this. Let's tell Pelosi, let's tell all the government officials that student debt is going to be wiped. Period. Thank you.
Speak it, Yakub.
Shahid, who organized this event?
The primary organizers were San Francisco Rising, and I saw a number of organizers from Coleman Advocates, an organization in the Excelsior. I'm really proud of the young people who put this together.
Just briefly, since we have you here, I'd love to ask you about a couple of disparate things. You have a new piece in Down with Tyranny about Nina Turner's defeat by establishment Democrats and the lies that they told to defeat her. You would think these people were from a different party. Okay. You yourself faced a similar set of lies in your race, and you are offering a warning based on what you see as a pattern used against progressive candidates. Can you talk about the lies and the pattern?
The pattern stretches from Massachusetts to California in the last year alone. Alex Morse facing Richie Neal, Nina Turner against Shontel Brown, and in our race against Nancy Pelosi. In all three of those races, disinformation turned the races. In Nina's case, it was attack ads funded by corporate GOP money in particular, calling her not a real Democrat. I mean, the irony there is almost too much to bear. But the point I particularly want to focus on is they didn't attack the merits of her positions, Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. They just attacked what her positions were. They were lying about Nina's background and what she wanted to stand for. And similarly, I was lied about in San Francisco, not through attack ads, but in the press. When you have journalists who suppress whistleblowers and publish fabrications orchestrated by party operatives to defend the center from progressive challengers, that is an attack not on people like Alex or Nina or me. It's an attack on elections and the voters. We might be the subject of the corporate Democratic lies, but we're not the targets. The targets are voters in the democratic process. And ultimately, I feel as committed to defending the democratic process as I do to climate justice and universal health care, right? We have to guard our democracy against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And a big part of that is ensuring that voters get accurate information. And that's the role historically of the press. We've seen journalists in many cases abandon that role. And so it falls to candidates and campaigns to do the job of educating voters. And, I call out this pattern because voters and journalists and campaigns need to be aware of not just the predictability of these attacks, but then hopefully also anticipate them and prepare for them.
Talk about the lawsuit you filed last month against the Chronicle to defend election integrity and vindicate press ethics. Do you think the lawsuit seems like it would certainly bring attention to what has happened and what happens, whether you win or lose? But if you win the suit, what does that mean for the press that's already supposed to be doing what you're suing them for not doing?
I hope it sends the signal to the press to do the work. Ethical journalism requires, for instance, calling back whistleblowers and not silencing them, as whistleblowers here in San Francisco have been silenced for a full year. I want to name one of them. Gloria Berry is an elected party official. She's an Afro-Latina community activist who was recruited to participate in a smear campaign targeting me and our supporters. She caught our critics telling different lies before they became public. She tried to speak out, and she herself was first silenced, then bullied, then threatened, harassed, hacked, and now smeared herself by Democratic Party organizations. And you have white city employees threatening an Afro-Latina elected party official for challenging these lies. And in the context of our lawsuit, we're basically vindicating the right of the public to receive accurate information from the newspaper of record. And among the things that the Chronicle did was not only suppress whistleblowers and ignore evidence, they published multiple stories accusing me of sexual misconduct, and it all fell apart when anybody actually did the investigation. And I want to thank Ryan Grimm at The Intercept for that work, but it took 2 months. And the idea that people of color are presumptively guilty when we're accused in public for political purposes is one thing, but the political purposes don't make those kinds of false accusations any less racist. And the point I just want to make really sharply there is the complicity of the Democratic Party leadership in leveraging white supremacy and lies to the public to keep themselves in power. and the cravenness, the depths of the corruption are even deeper than it might seem on the surface. And that's why I particularly wrote that article.
Well, thank you for that. And I look forward to covering that as the case moves forward, as your campaign moves forward. Just as an end note, in your campaign video and earlier in this interview, you mentioned that when you were just about to go to college, your family lost the family home. Given that background, can you talk about what we just saw happened with Congress allowing the eviction moratorium to expire while they went on vacation?
Tell me about it. Nancy Pelosi is the 7th wealthiest member of Congress. She is a wealthy landlord herself. And I do wonder if the priorities for House Democrats might be different if a wealthy landlady didn't lead the caucus. I've had years of my life when I wasn't sure where I'd be staying that night. And people who have had, Cori Bush shares that experience. And those of us who have been through that, I think have a great deal of perspective to offer the process. The other thing that Cori and I share is a background in direct action. And I saw the value of that inside-outside strategy, the power and influence of a legislator willing to use extra legal activism as a way to force public attention. That's the kind of not just subject matter, but also the style and method that I aim to back up in Congress. And I'm eager to back Cori up from the hearing rooms to the streets.
Shahid Buttar, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Thanks for all of the work that you are doing to protect the people in a number of ways, be it from a disingenuous press to from a corporate Democrat, center Democrat party that would not even be considered left in the past. Thank you so much, and we will continue to follow everything that you do.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You're watching ActTV. Stay with us. Our next segment, we are going to speak with Christina Conklin, the author of The Atlas of Disappearing Places. Welcome to ActTV. I'm Julianna Forlano. San Francisco, New York City, Shanghai. Climate change will alter all of these centers of civilization and culture beyond recognition over the coming decades, and I would argue possibly even sooner. As human activity remakes the climate, strengthening storms, rising sea levels are inevitable, and no one really is prepared to meet the magnitude of these challenges to come. Coastal communities will be particularly hard hit, and locales as far-flung as Ile, Japan, London, England, and all the ones I just mentioned will struggle to adapt to the increasing trauma and fever in our ocean system. In the Atlas of Disappearing Places, a new book subtitled Our Coasts and Oceans in the Climate Crisis, co-author and artist Christina Conklin makes a plea in the way that only an artist can to save the health of our oceans, on which we all depend. Using a beautiful, moving, innovative ink on dried seaweed technique, Conklin has created maps depicting 20 locations across the globe that are in danger of disappearing if we don't change course. Christina Conklin is joining us today to speak about the book and about her work in addition to climate change. Christina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, where do we start? So many people are really afraid right now. I think across the globe, we are seeing there is no area that has been untouched. At first, when we were talking about sea level rise and climate change, we were concerned about the Maldives and the Philippines, and now it's every single place and touching people in their lives. I have friends, should I fly to Greece and go visit my mother I haven't seen in 2 years, but Greece is on fire, etc. People are really afraid for their futures, for in the present moment, and for the loss of things we love, like trees and nature and animals. A lot of talk is always about climate change, is about ourselves, but the enormous loss of the beloved things that people love is another area. It seems like we're not allowed to talk about those things, and art, as you have shown, has this singular capacity by bypassing the words. Can you talk about the ways art and artists can help people get through the fear that they are experiencing right now, and maybe even inspire some action?
Well, I think art has this ability to touch people. And excuse me. I wanted to make the point that we're not actually separate from nature. We are actually, we're one species of millions. We're part of nature. We've done a lot of things to make ourselves separate from nature, especially in recent decades with kind of the extractive economy, with consumerism. But I think in making the art, I really wanted to show how deeply related we are to the ocean, and how, I mean, we come from the sea. If you think evolutionarily, which I like to do, this is really fundamental to who we are as beings, and we really need to get back in touch with that relationship with the natural world. If we don't, we're wrecking our only home.
How do you think people can do that? It seems like there's so much pushing us against that.
Right. I think we got to push back, right? I think it in a lot of ways it boils down to individual choices. We need to make the concerted effort to have a relationship with the natural world, to really read and think and learn about the natural world in a way that makes us feel that connection. And instead of going to the mall, go on a walk, right?
We can't go to the mall now because we'll get COVID. So at least something positive is going to come out of this.
Right. Well, and of course, COVID showed how connected all these systems are. I mean, it is just, we are part of one system. And so we can imagine that these things are separate, but every choice we make has an impact. And that's, really what I think I learned from the book was how deeply intertwined every aspect of the ocean system is with weather, with the fires in Greece, the floods that are happening all over the world. These things are all, and this is really the thin end of the wedge. So if we're feeling that there's some pressure on us right now, we are at the very, very beginning of dramatic changes. Some of which are going to unfold regardless of what we do, but of course we have a lot of power to impact the rate of change and the enormity of the disasters to come. Because unless we start to stop using fossil fuels and draw back down carbon emissions to a pre-industrial level, then it's going to be a very, very difficult transition through the next few decades.
One of the things I really liked about the book, and we cover climate change on this show quite a bit, and it's a lot of numbers. It's going to go up by 20 feet. It's a lot of graphs, and I loved the book because you gave fictional images of what our most endangered areas may look like by 2050, which isn't that far away. Most people watching will be alive, and their kids will be and their kids will be, I think that is what drove you to do that. I think it's incredibly useful. In fact, when I ask people, I'm like, well, what does that exactly mean to people? They'll say climate migration, but what does that exactly? It means you have to pack up your house. Oh, you can't pack up your house. You just take your clothes on your back and you walk to, I don't know, Canada, because one of your maps shows how everyone's going to be moving north. Can you talk about that speculative aspect of your work?
Right. Well, what drove me to write the book in the first place was an article in my local paper where somebody said something like they didn't care what was going to happen in 30 years because, they'd be dead or something. And I thought that was just outraged me. And I thought, okay, 30 years is the blink of an eye. My children need that world to be healthy. And so in each chapter of the book, we write a story of what that place could look like in 30 years. And that's a combination of, the disasters that will come if we keep going with business as usual, and also the hopeful possibilities of what can change. So it's a way of introducing a lot of the wonderful things that are already happening in the world to change the story, to write a new story. So it's everything from like innovative ways to cultivate seaweed as a biofuel to policy changes and changes in law that could really change the direction of the whole planet, and also individual actions. You know, let's stop buying plastic, right? If we don't buy it, they won't make it. And
I think they will make it. They'll force it down our throats.
Well, right now we need to know though that the fossil fuel industry plans to replace every drop of gas we don't use in our cars with plastic that we do use, disposable plastic items. So that is their, you know, that is their business plan, and so if we
not
know
recycled ones, right? New ones, some new kind of one.
Yeah, and all plastics are just another fossil fuel, and so they, you know, the prediction is that there will be a pound of plastic in the ocean for every pound of fish by the year 2050, unless we do something very different. So it's time to really have an awakening. I feel culturally that we're on the wrong track, and that we can change that track because we have the power to do so.
I don't want to make people think that this book is giantly depressing. It's actually very heartening. There's stories and views of positive change that are happening, which are really wonderful. But we're seeing today, the reports are out today, just in time for your interview, which I don't know. We had to reschedule this interview several times, so maybe it's kismet that you happen to be here today. The reports that the flow in the Atlantic, that I think it's called a belt, is breaking down, meaning that all of the weather is going to be changing abruptly, which it's already doing. I don't understand how people don't see this, but it's already doing this. That is the flow that keeps Europe habitable. Without it, as it continues to break down, Europe will not be habitable. What are your thoughts about, did you see this in the news?
Yes, right. So, and we talk about this in the book. It's the the ocean conveyor belt in the Atlantic Ocean.
Conveyor belt. I knew it was some kind of belt.
Yes, like the airport. But right. So it brings the warm air up from the tropics, and it makes Northern Europe and Eastern North America, you know, far warmer and more comfortable, and you know, able to grow crops than it would be otherwise. There was a past example of this current slowing down about 500 years ago, and it led to what's called the Little Ice Age in Europe. And so, you know, these things have real impacts on the global scale. You were talking earlier about climate migration. You know, the UN expects hundreds of millions of climate migrants to have to take to the road in the coming decades because their lands are no longer habitable. I write about Vietnam, where in the Mekong Delta, they grow half of the rice for the country of Vietnam on a very small piece of the land, but the land is all 3 feet or less above sea level. And it's expected to basically disappear by, you know, in the next 30, 40, 50 years.
I think it's less than that. I think we're going to be, personally, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I am married to a scientist. But yeah, I really think, I mean, just looking outside where I live, which is in the Northeast, we've had a very wet, floody, overly rainy and cold summer. And when I go to just like casually pick blueberries at the blueberry farm, there aren't any. So I'm not sure when we're going to be seeing this effect hit our grocery stores and our tables, but I would imagine it's going to be within the next year or two. It's not going to be, I'm just saying, right. I'm going against science. I'm putting my money on we're in trouble right now, which maybe if we could get to that guy who wrote, I don't care what's going to happen in 30 years because he's so self-centered. If we suggest to him, I'm assuming it's a guy, to say, you know, it's going to be you and it's going to be now. I mean, we are seeing it now.
Well, and it's already hundreds of millions of people all over the world. So we're fairly protected in our comfortable, you know, economy and environment. For the most part, but there's real suffering happening all over the world. And the other thing that I really wanted to point out in this book is that, you know, we're one species, as you noted, that there are billions of creatures in the ocean who are part of a food web, part of a living system, part of the Earth system, and we are unfolding changes for these creatures. I mean, you're showing a polar bear, but there are also these microorganisms that are the basis of the entire food web the changes that are unfurling in the open ocean are dramatic. The ocean is 26% more acidic than it was 50 years ago. I mean, imagine living in an environment that is, that much more acidic. And it's losing oxygen. So warmer water is less able to contain oxygen. So imagine that you are a creature living in an environment that doesn't have enough oxygen. So and we don't understand enough about the ocean and how this very complicated web of life actually operates. I wrote one chapter about the Arabian Sea, which used to be based on one system of phytoplankton and in the food web, and then it just flipped in a few years to an entirely other system. It was called regime shift. And these things will be happening more and more around the world with, just really unknown impacts. So the only thing we can do is stop using fossil fuels and draw down carbon emissions. That's the only way to write a new story.
Let's take a look at some of the beautiful artwork that you have in your book, The Atlas of Disappearing Places. And if you could just talk about the art. One of the images that I loved so much was, I don't know if they have names, but it's the one where you use the dots on the coastlines to show how many people live there it is. How many people live. Oh wait, I think there's a different one where it's just dots. Well, we could talk about this one too, because that's interesting, but we'll get the dots one up there. And it's just, there it is. It shows,
so those are all the cities in the world
that
are going to be affected by climate change. Those are the cities that will be affected by sea level rise. So that's everywhere, right? Can you see any part of the world that isn't outlined there, except for, Northern Australia and Northern Canada? That's really everywhere. And so every chapter I wanted to include maps that tell both a specific story about a specific place. This is in the New York chapter, but that also show the global reach of the problem, because each one of these problems affects everywhere on Earth.
And you think like, oh, well, if it's flooded, we'll just move inland. No, there's no. Inland is on fire. I'm sorry. It's not just rising.
In a way, what I would say is actually that sea level rise is one of the easier problems for us to solve, because we can move. Like we do have, the capability, and some countries have the resources if they plan early enough to make these moves. And the story in New York is that really people just need to move to higher ground. The urban planners and the city officials and the voting public need to understand that you cannot defend 520 miles of shoreline with seawalls in a world where the ocean is going to rise for the next 500 years. So the last time we had this much carbon in our atmosphere, seas were 50 to 80 feet higher. Our job is to turn that story around and tell a new story.
And you're doing that right here with art. Can you talk about this image that we're looking at on the screen right now?
So this is New York City.
Yeah.
This is the social vulnerability map of New York City. So all of the painted areas are the you think about the economic devastation and the social, the social devastation that will cause again and again and again. The only solution is for people to invest in change and in redevelopment of land on higher ground, to build smart cities. There's wonderful planning options out there that that urban planners really would like to enact. I feature the climate czar in New York City in this chapter, and I think he really would love to move further faster, but you're constrained by what the public will allow. So I think part of my call is that people understand this change is coming, and that we have to adapt, and we have to be smart and invest early, and not pretend that this is just going to magically not happen.
from the things that we cover here at actTV and from what we've seen over the course of the last 5 decades, but also the last year with the year and a half with the pandemic, it doesn't seem like the people with the cash really care about what's happening to the people who are going to be more specifically affected. Some of those areas in New York are probably the lower income areas down along the base of New York, around Brooklyn. Some of those areas in New Jersey are actually, that you showed in New Jersey, are actually more well-heeled. But it seems to me, when I speak to people, they are not aware that this is coming right away, even though it is happening, right now. We had a huge flood right here not too long ago. I'm not sure what part of that you might want to speak to. The fact that the people who can make that urban plan don't care about the people who might be affected, and the ones with money can move.
It is. It's a real, I think it's incumbent upon us all. I mean, I think to really understand the vulnerability of large numbers of people, the vulnerable people often do live at the shoreline. So all of the red areas shows the most vulnerable people. And it's really just a moral call of our time to take care of all the people. And I guess it's hard to know how to say it beyond that it's, we really need to change our values and have our values drive our decisions. This is a real, we're at a crossroads culturally, because the climate crisis has really put this right in front of our faces, that our ways of making decisions and doing politics of recent decades is really, really broken, and is going to cause really untold amounts of suffering.
We are speaking with Christina Conklin, author of The Atlas of Disappearing Places, combining art and science, a groundbreaking new book that brings to life the coastal communities dying from climate change. Christina, what are your hopes for the book as it makes its way out into the public?
Well, my hope is that it sparks a lot of understanding about the ocean, because I love the ocean. I think a lot of people do. I really want people to understand the complexity and beauty of that system and how related to it we are. That it's not separate, it's not over there, some big cold empty bathtub. It is the basis of the living world that we live on. And there's no other book on the ocean in this same way. So that I would like people to learn a lot, and really understand that we can each be part of this change, that we must all figure out what our best offering is and make it. Now is the time. This is the decade. This is we call it the all hands on deck decade. This is when the change needs to happen, according to scientists and the UN. This is when major policy changes need to happen, and we really need to press our politicians and make some bold changes in our own lives as well.
Well, that's what we're doing here on actNOW, helping to press our politicians, helping to raise the voices of the people who are fighting for justice, both on the climate and in every other area. Christina, thank you so much for for joining us. The book is the Atlas of Disappearing Places, on sale now. I encourage everyone to go get one. Thanks again, Christina.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're watching actTV. Don't forget to follow us across platforms. This is our brand new show, actNOW. I am looking very, very much forward to having you back next week. I'm Julianna Forlano. You can follow me on Twitter at Julianna Forlano. And you can follow actTV across platforms. We're on the Insta, we're on the Facebooks, we're on the YouTube. And if you miss any of these shows live, you can watch the replay on YouTube in the following days. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.